crazy. It was hard to get us together.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I had the flu for, I was down for a week.
that's been going around. So many people I know have the flu and or had it, and so many of my students have it. The class was practically empty today because so many people were out sick. So, it's really going around.
Well, if you get what you think is a cold, test.
Yeah. I
So,
did you take there's a medication you can take for
temp,
flu. Yeah, Tamiflu. Did you take it?
very effective.
Mm,
Very effective.
really?
You have to do it soon after the onset of symptoms. But uh,
Yeah.
fortunately, my daughter insisted on giving me a test. Uh, so the first time it was negative, and then the next morning it was positive,
Oh, really?
and she immediately called this was on the weekend when it turned positive, Saturday. So we called the doctor, and he got a prescription right away. And I was starting to feel better within 24 hours.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Some
I
of the
mean,
people I know, it's taken them weeks, and then they have the lingering cough.
well, I have a lingering cough. So apparently that is what happens, that
Yeah.
the, the flu is gone 7 days from the onset of symptoms. And
Okay. That's
so
good.
I
That's not terrible.
mostly stayed away from people for that 7 days.
That's a good idea.
Uh, uh, so there were some people who put on a mask and came over.
Oh,
So,
really? That's nice.
yeah. Well, there's a group of women in this building who have decided that I need taking care of.
Oh, really?
So they've organized into a group that looks after me. So they
That's great.
bring me soup. One of them is a nurse, retired now, but so when I had a video visit with the doctor, she sat with me, and she brought a stethoscope and could report that my chest was clear.
Really?
Yeah, yeah,
You always have managed to be connected in a meaningful way with people. I think it's so cool
yeah. Well,
because, you know,
no, I actually like people.
I know you do. So we're live. Um,
Oh, we
and
are. Okay.
yeah, we're live. So I wanted to just let people know who are on or coming on that we're going to be talking about generativity today. And a lot of people don't know what that term is, but you and I, as aging specialists, know all about that term. So, shall I start by telling people a little bit about you and a little bit about me?
Yeah, and then you can say a little bit about generativity.
Sure. So, hello, good to see you on here. Um, so, I am an applied developmental psychologist. My name is Deborah Heiser. I have been in the field since the 1990s. I started out in research, studying everything no one wants to have or get, and pivoted to looking at what we can expect that's positive in life. So that's a little bit about me. I just wrote the Mentorship Edge, and I have something new coming out, which I'm really excited to talk about. I don't know if I'll talk about it today, but it's called Depress Check, and it's a depression screener that gives you access to everyone that you could need to follow up with or see that's in your zip code. Um, and Michael, who's joined me, is somebody that I've known for a really long time. Back in the days when he was the founder, but when he was running as president, the mental geriatric mental health alliance. So he founded that, and he's been advocating for aging, for decades. He's been in the field for 50 years, and he has done extensive writing. You can find his writing on Substack, but you can also find his artwork as well. He's always been an amazing photographer. I've been the happy recipient of one of his jazz photos. So Michael and I started to get back touch talking because he talks about the very old. He's in his 80s and I'm in my 50s, and I talk about midlife. And we thought it'd be really interesting to talk about a topic when we get on and see how we are the same or how we differ in whatever the topic is. And today we're going to talk about generativity. We'll define it too. So, did I leave anything out, Michael?
I I don't think so. Thank you for the kind introduction. And,
I'm going to put you can find Michael um, at his website, michaelfriedman.com, but I'm putting it in the chat here as well. So if you are seeing us, we are live in 3 different locations: Facebook, YouTube, and on TikTok. So if you want to get some of the resources, you can check us out on YouTube where the resources are getting posted. So I'm going to go ahead and give a little stab at defining generativity, if you're okay with that.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Make, make it easier for me, then I can.
So generativity is an emotional developmental milestone. Most of us think of, as we develop, as walking and talking and those kinds of milestones, but we have a lot of emotional milestones that nobody really thinks about or pays much attention to. And right smack in the middle of midlife is when we hit a stage called generativity. And it's where we have a desire to give back to others without expecting anything in return. And so, this is something that just comes naturally to us. But I talk to so many people in midlife, and they'll say, "Oh, I got a desire to start a podcast, or I started to do something like volunteer, or I got involved in giving back in some way." And they don't think about it much, but that's generativity. So it's giving back to others. And the real reason that we do this developmentally is that we need to feel like we matter by the time we hit midlife. Like, did all those boxes that I checked in my earlier years, going to college, doing, whatever I didn't work, raising kids, all of that, did that matter? Do I matter? What's my footprint in the world? And so generativity allows us to then say, what do I want to do? How do I want to show that I matter to myself and to the world? And it's a way of leaving a legacy. So we usually engage in this in ways such as volunteering or mentoring or philanthropy. And that is where we are connecting meaningfully with others, and we're engaging and giving back. And the giver is usually the recipient that gets the most, not just a legacy, but a feeling of mattering. So I'm going to start it with that and send it over to you, Michael. What do you have to say about generativity?
Well, I think what you've said is right on. Uh, I emphasize the fact that generativity has to do with the assumption that most people will become parents, and that as they move along in life. So if you take the Ericksonian scheme, you have young adults who need to get a handle on work and on intimate relationships, and having formed intimate relationships, they generally move on to have children. And the task for them, the challenge for them, and the opportunity for them is to help the next generation, to bring up the next generation, to raise them. And I think that that's core to the idea of being generative, that it has a lot to do with uh, a generation bringing up, supporting, helping another generation to grow up and to flourish. But I also think that generativity has a double meaning. One meaning has to do with what I do for the generation younger than me, who I'm helping to bring along. You always talk about mentorship, which is one way of doing that. I emphasize parenting, which is another way of doing that. But I think the other meaning of generative is adding something to the world, making something, generating something, creating something. And that's an important part of it. And it's two, the dual meaning, I think, that is very important to understand. That it's both the creation of something new, and at the most basic, it's being a parent, raising your children.
So there's been talk about that, and is being a parent being generative? Because there's an, and I'm not going to say yes or no to this, but there's been debate on that because it's there was a saying that my mother-in-law used to always say to me. I would say, "I love my children." She'd say, "You don't get a medal for that. You're expected to."
Right.
So there's an expectation that you're supposed to be giving back with children, and so the idea is, um, can you be generative without children, and can you be generative, um, in other ways? So an example that I always give, and this debate is out there, right? So I'm just putting it out there to be an item to maybe discuss further. But yeah, and I'm seeing people in here saying like inheritance, things like that. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so one of the things about generativity is, like you're saying, generate something from you into to others. And I like to say, here's what it looks like if we don't hit this. And I call it the Ebenezer effect. And I wrote about this in the book that I wrote, The Mentorship Edge, where Ebenezer Scrooge, for those of who know that character, he is an individual who had on paper everything. He was somebody who was a self-made guy, lived in a mansion. He had um, people taking care of all of his needs, but he was miserable. And it wasn't until he started giving back to others that he felt joy. And that's kind of how it works for us. There's a bazillion examples of this in film and in television and in books. But if you look around, you can often see that this is how it is with people. It's almost like a light switch that gets turned on when a person is able to be generative and give a bit of themselves to others meaningfully. And so I think that, we have more bandwidth in midlife to be able to do that. Can we do it earlier? Yes. Is there an age that it matters? No. You could be 93 or you could be 33, but the majority of us hit it in a way that we can feel it by midlife because we're choosing what we want to give back and how. What do you think about that? What's your thought on that? There's a debate.
I think number one that uh, now I don't have the data off the top of my head, and the data have changed over time. But I think that most people choose to have children, um, and that is fundamental to their task as adult human beings. Having made that choice, it becomes their job, as it were, their developmental task to raise their children.
Yeah.
Can you be generative without having children? Absolutely. You can be a teacher. You can do all sorts of things that help to support the younger generation. So I think there's no question that that's the case. But I do think that parenting is really fundamental in human development. Maybe I have an excessively biological view of this, but it seems to me that we are moving from one generation to another in the human species, and there is a job of the generation that can have children to have children. And again, I don't have a moral sense of that. I don't think you have to do it. I'm not J.D. Vance out there saying you're a terrible woman if you decide you don't want to have children by any means. There are just lots of other things that you can do, as you point out. But I do think parenting is essential to it. Also, I think your observation that you can be generative past midlife is very
Right.
important. So I think if we think about what it is that uh, uh, makes it possible for old people like me to have lives that we find satisfying. I was about to say age well. There are all sorts of different terms, aging well, successful aging, and so forth. All means basically the same thing. Um, And I think that for many of us, having a making a contribution to future generations is extremely important.
Yeah.
So even at my age, even at 82, so you're in your 50s and you have how old is your
I I have two kids. They are 20 and 21.
okay, so they're pretty well on their way by now, and you've done what you've done. I have a 43-year-old. I have two grandchildren, and I think that one of the things that does happen developmentally is that we move from being parents to being grandparents, and that's a different role, a very important role in the development of the species. Uh, Grandparents play a significant part in the raising of children.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up, and I'm happy that you brought up grandparenting because in generativity, when talking about it, it's often the grandparent role that is so important because, you know, you're really tasked with your job as a parent is that you're supposed to parent and, you know, generate from yourself to them. But it's not with grandparents. It is not where you are really, there's a requirement for that. You choose to do that. And grandparents are the ones who pass down religion. They're the ones who pass down the family traditions, the family values, all of the things in the family that we sort of take for granted and that we, you know, live our lives with doing and feeling. And those are some of the most important things to us. So when people say, you know, what matters to you, a lot of people will say it's the values, my family values, my religion, or you know, the culture that I have. And you know, some of that is I mean, that's how religion gets passed down. Oftentimes it's our grandparents, right? Or the family values, those sorts of things. It's that person that is passing it down. And the interesting thing is every Thanksgiving I'm reminded of my grandmother because I use her recipe cards that are written in her handwriting how to make the entire Thanksgiving dinner. And I even make the things that I don't like
Yeah,
because now when we have Thanksgiving, this tradition lasts on. And I took it completely for granted until one year I had my uncle come visit. And he was nearly in tears because he ate the dinner and he said, "It's my childhood." And it was exactly what he used to eat. He had been eating his wife's traditional Thanksgiving dinner and not this one. And those are the things that, if you think about generating to the next generation, grandparents do that. People don't even think about it, but it's the most powerful stuff that gets passed down.
but I think it has changed over time, so that
So,
and maybe I'm wrong about this. I've been wrong once or twice in my life. Uh, but my rule as a grandparent is bite my tongue because I am tempted, and my friends who are my age are tempted to say to their kids who are raising our grandchildren, no, 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 that's not the way to do it. You should be doing something else. Bite your tongue.
but don't your values come through in who you are? And do you think that there's a bit of you that is picked up? Because when I looked back at the recipe cards, there was no discussion. No one talked about it. They were just passed down. We ate it, you know, we no one thought about it. I mean, if you look at the traditions when you enter a home of a relative, you don't have to think about it. You kind of know what to expect. There's a whole tradition there. There's a whole culture there. There's a whole value there. And that isn't something that you have to necessarily say, here's the method that we're going to use for this. It's just done.
I think both things are true. I think that when I think back to my grandparents, particularly to the grandfather I knew, one of my grandfathers died when I was 2, so I never really knew him. But the other died when I was 12, and he and I were very close. He was very powerful. He was very sure of himself, and things had to be done his way. The conflict that resulted between him and his daughter, my mother, was quite significant. And obviously, the family survived these battles, but he was overbearing. Certainly, that was my mother's take on it. And I think that I think this varies from culture to culture, but I think that
Do you have a culture that was passed down? Do you have values that were passed down, regardless of personality? Like, you know, is there a culture? Could you say, in my family, we are, we celebrate this, we do this, this is the tradition. Do you have any of that?
some, and interestingly enough, my daughter has uh, continued with our religious traditions.
So that's what I mean, though, is that, and you could even have a blip there, right?
But
But
I
it
think
probably is going to continue.
I think the influence that I've had was when I was her parent. I don't,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and that she is passing on values that she got from me and from
Mhm.
my wife to her children. Uh, I that's
There's,
I I don't talk to my grandchildren in the way that I talk to my daughter.
I think most grandparents don't talk to their grandchildren the same way or interact in the same way. Um, but there is, in many ways, we had my mother-in-law live with us for about 10 years, and there was a difference between the interactions with us and the kids and her and the kids. And we all lived in the same house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I knew that, they'd get in trouble, and then somehow she was sneaking them candy bars, things like that. She was communicating, a value of, hey, there's somebody here who's always going to have your back. That's
So
me, you know?
I am a strong believer that grandparents are developmentally important. And I remember years ago, many years ago, I was involved in a kind of informal seminar with one of the leading psychoanalysts in New York City at the time. That was when psychoanalysis dominated psychological thinking. That really was in another century, and early on in it. Uh, and I
There's been research, Michael, on the importance of and the value of grandparenting children. There is now even Laura Brazen is doing work on kinship care, and the role of grandparents in taking over care, actual full-time care of their grandchildren.
I led a study on that
Really?
for AARP in New York State some years ago. Much of what I've done is years ago. So, but that's another thing to talk about. It really is very interesting and a matter of considerable concern. But the point I was going to make was that in this group led by a leading psychoanalyst, and I don't know whether it was my suggestion or his, but we started to talk about the importance of grandparents to the developmental process. If you think about sort of Freudian developmental theory, the important figures in that are mommy and daddy. There's no mention. I don't know if there's any mention any place in Freud of grandparents. Do you know?
I don't know, but I do know that it's been, the research, there is research and there were some flaws in it. As you probably know, that there was this whole thought that that the mom was the one that had to be the caregiver. And we know now that a caregiver can be anyone that is connected with the child, right? So that that you just need somebody that's a caring caregiver there. So that might be an aunt, a grandparent, could be a dad, it could be whomever, but they left dad out all the time as though they weren't important in raising children. And they also left out grandparents. So it was really all just on mom. And so that has changed. There's been a lot of new research, and for a while now, on the importance of grandparents, the importance of fathers, the importance of all sorts of caregivers in the life of children.
Yes, that certainly has changed over the years. So I think that when we talk about grandparents, number one, we need to say what you've already said, and that is that they are important carriers of values and traditions.
Yeah.
And I think there's little doubt about that. But I also think that in certain cultures and in other generations in the past, uh, the grandparents were more likely to be appreciated for their wisdom by their children than they are now, in at least the culture that I'm part of. Uh,
I don't know. I haven't read anything about that to know if there's data to support that.
I
Um,
don't know either.
I don't know, and that'd be interesting for people to comment on, to say what they think about that. But that is an interesting thing, as we evolve and change culturally within the U.S. There can be differences. There are differences, though, if you look, within our country. There are certain parts of the country that have a lot more. They look at multi-generational living a little bit differently, that where homes are built to make it easier for multi-generational living. I live in New York, and it was incredibly difficult to find homes that were good for multi-generational living. We had to look and look and look and look and look, because there are stairs everywhere. There, the rooms weren't set up in the right way. And so if you look at certain towns, there are towns where homes are intentionally built for multi-generational living. And I think that would have a different culture in terms of looking at how people value, grandparenting as well. When you live in a home, a multi-generational home, you look at grandparenting differently than you do otherwise, because everyone's enmeshed in one, they're all there all day.
I'm sure that's true. Um, I also am inclined to believe that in that there are tensions between the generations, and that while there are some cultures in which there's deference to the grandparent generation, there are other cultures, such as the one that I live in, where there is not deference to the grandparents' wisdom. Uh, there may be affection, but that's not the same thing as deference. So
That's the culture.
you may,
Differences.
you'll see as your kids
Yeah.
have kids what happens.
Yeah, that's true. I think that every family has its own sort of internal culture, the values that are passed on, and all of that. But it's very interesting. But grandparents are a really big part of generativity, and that was something that was overlooked for a long time. And people thought that generativity was just something that was really narrowly looked at. And now looking at generativity, it has these endless opportunities for us to engage in generating a bit of ourselves out into the world, whether that's grandparenting, whether that's you know, looking at volunteering, mentoring, philanthropy, you know, all of those, your writing that you do for Substack. And, you know, if people are putting stuff out there in any way, people start podcasting, they do live streams, they do whatever. That's all generativity. You're putting a little piece of yourself out there into the world. And I love seeing, it's almost like when I'm looking for it, but when I see that light switch go off in people who are midlife and they suddenly say, I'm going to go do this. And I've seen it with people who are beyond midlife as well. To me, it's really refreshing to see it, you know, because so many people think as you get older, you're not interested in life, or you're disconnected from the world, and people aren't.
One of the things that I find interesting is that there are people who lead lives that are, to be harsh about it, fundamentally selfish. We won't turn this into a political conversation. Uh, but there are people who live lives that are fundamentally selfish, who also have care for their younger generation. Uh, I wonder, and you may know this, I don't know if there's been research on it, but I suspect that there are some people who really don't give much of a damn about the well-being of the next generation. But maybe what it is that their sphere of interest is narrow.
I have a theory about this, and let me run it by you to see what you think. You know, when I was younger, I was at the tail end of when civic engagement was really important. When, you know, for young people, where it was a requirement in school, but it was also a social requirement in many ways. So, like being a candy striper, going out and doing community service work. It wasn't tied to any kind of a religion or anything like that. It was part of the community that you would go and you would help others. And, you know, people that I know would volunteer and work in the hospital, work in places or go visit people who needed things. And that was something that people did as teenagers. It was really expected. And then we became much more solid, you know, single focus, like brand yourself, get yourself out there. Don't think of others, you know, get yourself where you need to go. And civic engagement took a little bit of a backseat. And I think of civic engagement, which is how we engage with the world. It allows us to see the world and, you know, ourselves in the world and how we're connected. Without that, that makes it so that it's harder to become generative. So it may feel selfish, but it's really that, you know, that hasn't been out there as a taught kind of a thing. And I saw that, you know, it was harder for me to get my kids civically engaged because that wasn't a part of the community in the same way. I had to look for it and try to make that something that was available, as opposed to it just being like you did it because everybody else did it and you learned then how to do that. So I've seen that, you know, like people will plan for going to college, they'll plan for a career, but saying, I need to keep my blinders on and not think of others and think of how I can get myself to the next level. I don't know what you think about that, but I think that those who are civically engaged get being generative more so than those who have not been civically engaged.
I'm sure that's true. I also think that uh, civic engagement, whether volunteer or uh, working in organizations that are seeking the improvement of the world, make the world a better place. I think it's good for people. I think that and I think there is evidence that people, particularly older people, who engage in activities that are designed to help their community, that are designed to improve the world, are happier,
Yes.
more satisfied with their lives than people who don't do that.
Yes. And that's true. That has been found that
Yes.
in research for sure. That is so true. It feels so good to give for the person giving. A lot of people feel like you're giving and so you're going to be depleted, but no, it's the opposite. You end up feeling better.
I think that's true, and I think it's important. I think one of the things that we should talk about, you mentioned at the beginning, and that is the importance of legacy.
Yes. So go ahead, take it away.
I'm not sure where to go with it, but look, I'm an old man. Am I going to be remembered? I was. I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
A few years ago, I was at a pre-wedding party, and I got talking. It was a second marriage. I got talking with the daughter of my friend who was getting married, who was a comparative literature student at Yale. This is a smart kid. And as we got into a conversation, I mentioned the person who, in my time, was the most famous and arguably the most important literary critic in the United States, a man by the name of Lionel Trilling. And she said, "Who?" This is a generation later, and the most important person in her field in my generation, forgotten. Now, I ended up taking some pleasure in that because I realized that in some years I would be as famous as Lionel Trilling. Neither one of us would be remembered.
Well,
but it is stunning the extent to which people are forgotten. And I think about that as an old man. I was very pleased recently when I got re-involved with the Geriatric Mental Health Council of New York, which was created by the Geriatric Mental Health Act, which started with me. So, I feel some ownership of it, but I hadn't been there in years. And I went to a meeting and people remembered me. Well, I was really moved by that because I didn't expect it. I had a mentor who was in his time the single most powerful person in the field of mental health in New York. And I had not so long before that been chatting with somebody from the New York State Office of Mental Health, and I mentioned this person's name is Jay Goldsmith. And I said, the first time I was in this room where we were about to have a meeting, I was here with Jay Goldsmith. Mm-hmm. Who? Oh my God. So I think about this now.
Yeah.
Am I going to be remembered? What am I going to leave behind?
I have a couple of questions for you. One is, what do you want to be remembered? What do you want to have people remember about you?
Well, that's a tough question,
Yeah, that's what
I think that there are two answers to that. One is I'd like to be remembered as I'd like to be remembered kindly, and I'd like to be remembered as a person who was kind.
And who do you want to remember you?
Oh, my grandchildren would be nice. I think my daughter will remember me, but I'm not so sure about my grandchildren. But they're old enough now to remember me.
And so, it's interesting that you say that because a lot of people that I've talked with have said the same thing. And so I realized that most of us do impactful things all the time, and we just don't count it, right? So I started to create the legacy tree after talking with the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, um, Bob Lefkowitz, who was like, "Oh, I don't even know how did I become this, Nobel Prize winner?" And he was like, "It had to have been something, what was it?" So he made himself a legacy tree that showed like his mentors, and then he had a harder time though figuring out who he mentored. That's what we all do. We all do things and forget who we impact. So he made his this legacy tree, and he ended up publishing it in a journal. And then he went to a conference, and some guy comes up to him and says, "Hey, Bob, I'm 6 degrees Lefkowitz." And Bob was able to hear his work in this person's words that were Bob's words, who he'd never met, and had 5 people between him and Bob who'd worked with, who'd been between them. And it was at that point that he said, "Wow, I know I made impact. I feel like I'm being remembered, or
Yeah.
I will always be a part of the world." And I realized I need to start to make that available for people. And I've been creating a program that allows people to quantify their impact. Like you're writing Substack, that's impact. You're going to be remembered. The Geriatric Mental Health Alliance, you're going to be remembered. All of the things that you do, not just for work, but for pleasure or other things, because we forget every day you're touching the life of somebody in some way, and it might feel teeny tiny, but it's like a snowball when you count it up in the end. So, like just now, when you told me just a few things in less than a minute, you talked about the Geriatric Act, the Geriatric Mental Health Alliance. You talked about all of these things within one breath. And the impact for that is enormous, because how many people are impacted by the Geriatric Mental Health Alliance? How many people are impacted by those things? Who did you pass the baton to? Who's now carrying it on? Those are the kinds of things that I don't know. You may know, but if you had the ability to quantify all of that, would that make you feel like you have more of a legacy, or that you have control over seeing,
I
you
don't
know?
know. I don't. That's a very interesting question. It's not something that's ever occurred to me. What I like is uh, hearing what's happening to the people who were my students,
Yeah.
to the people who work for me, uh, and I like hearing from the people who work for me.
Yeah.
So, I had a protege who at the Mental Health Association who started with me as a 22-year-old social work student, and I like to say she was so young that she had rings on her toes. And, she became the CEO of the Mental Health Association and the person who led the development of 988, which is the psychiatric emergency
Yeah.
numbers. She's an easy person to identify as somebody who I had some impact on over the years. But yes, I think there've been. I love it when I hear from former students
Yeah.
uh, and from people who used to work for me who've now gone on to do whatever they've done. I'm not a person who spends a lot of time on social media, uh, but I do look at LinkedIn every now and then, and occasionally I look at Facebook. And I love it on LinkedIn when one of my students pops up.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
I can find out. And recently, I heard from somebody who, years ago, when I was teaching at Columbia School of Public Health, had been my administrative assistant or whatever she was. She was a research assistant. And all of a sudden, she saw something I had written on Substack and got in touch.
Oh, that's great.
Haven't heard from her in years. So I love that. I love that. That's
And just to give a quick plug, what's the name of your Substack?
One Very Old Man.
Yours is One Very Old Man. Mine is The Right Side of 40. So if you're interested in midlife viewpoints and one very old man's viewpoint, you can check out our Substacks.
Yeah, we have, as you said in the beginning, a couple of times ago when we got together. You look you provide reassurance to people in their 50s that getting old is not going to be so bad. And then they shouldn't read me because I can assure them that there's going to be all sorts of bad stuff that happens. But I always add to that, you can still have a satisfying life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've in my blog, I write about myself, whatever narcissistic satisfaction that gives me. It's helpful to me, but I also think, you know, I'm trying to express the feeling of the various states that we talk
Yeah.
about. Generativity. Well, what does that feel like? Right? And so, if I write about generativity, and probably I will now, I would want to personalize them. I don't remember where I was going with this now, but no, I guess where I was going was I've got all sorts of issues in my life, health issues. My mind is not as agile as it once was. And the recent loss of my wife has been very difficult to live with. But I still have a good life.
You know, I'm glad you said that because I, like many people, when I started out in the 90s, look, you know, in research and aging, I didn't have a view of aging as a positive one. Now, we all want to get older, but when we think about it, we don't want what the stereotype of getting older looks like. So, you know, we fight it along the way. So we have all these biases, stereotypes about aging. And, you know, I went to a conference and had dinner with, so excited to talk about all the depression research, frailty, palliative care, end of life care that I had been researching and couldn't wait to tell everybody about it and thought everybody would be like, yay. And a guy across from me said, what do we have to look forward to? And I didn't have an answer.
Say that
And
again.
a guy across the table from me at this conference at a dinner said, what do we have to look forward to? All you're talking about are all these things that no one wants to have or get. And like Alzheimer's disease, frailty, depression, end of life. And so I was like, I didn't have an answer. So that's when I looked to generativity because that is the midlife stage that was proposed by Eric Erickson that was an emotional developmental milestone, not a physical one.
I
So
think we should talk about Erickson. Um, you know, so at the midlife stage, which is, he has 8 stages of development, right?
mhm,
The seventh stage is the stage that you're talking about, midlife.
yeah,
And he says that the success of every stage, he has a success and a failure. And in this case,
yeah,
he calls the success generativity, and he calls the failure stagnation, which is quite interesting. Uh, we might want to talk about that.
sure.
But then for the eighth stage, he proposes that uh, the success is what he calls an ego integrity, and the failure is what he calls despair. And I think he doesn't have it right.
What do you think?
Well, I think in the first place, the word integrity in English means something, and it means that you are true to your values.
I think the way that, you know, when I've read his work and how I've internalized it all is that when you're at the end of your life, you can say, I'm okay with my life. You know, that you're not. overcome with regret, that you're not, that you're feeling okay, even if you didn't do everything the way you wanted it to be done, that you're okay with it, that you have said, I'm all right with this,
I
um,
think I think
as
what he
opposed to
would
being
add,
in despair.
I think what he would add to that is that you feel that it was your life and not a life that was foisted on you. That that this is me, and in some sense, he would say, this is the person that you feel you were really meant to be. In some sense, I don't like the use of the word integrity for that, but I think
Some people say wisdom instead of integrity.
used. I'm sorry.
They'll use wisdom instead of integrity.
Yeah. Uh,
And he may not have gotten the word perfectly, but the idea behind it, and I don't study this stage. So it's not, I mean, I've read about it, look at it, but I really have looked at the generativity stage quite thoroughly. But the next stage, though, the only thing that I can say, having worked with individuals that resonated, was that I could see a distinction between those who, and I'll give an example, those who feel the wisdom or the integrity and those who don't. So an example would be, there was a woman that I was talking to. She was really old, and like in her 90s, and she was like, if only I could do something like learn how to knit or crochet. I was like, okay, hey, look, I got something for you. There's this place that'll teach you how to knit and crochet, and all you have to do is make little caps for people who are getting cancer treatment. And so I thought she would jump on this and be so excited about this. But no, she said, I'm not going to do it unless I get to keep them for myself. So her feeling that she didn't get enough in life was a sense of despair. She never felt like she had enough or got enough. And she was constantly feeling like she was, looking for, how was she going to be taken advantage of or something like that. That was despair for her, the way that I had internalized that. Now I've seen other people who will say, look, would I've liked to have been a person that won the lotto and did all kinds of things? I think I had a pretty good life. I had a family that I like. They like me. And did I make every decision perfectly? No, but I'm cool with it. I'm good with it. And I've seen a lot of that too.
so let me respond, and we just have a few minutes left before I have to get off. So a few things I would say. One is in talking about uh, what it is to have a good life as you're getting close to the end of life. I find it very useful to refer back to a poem by Robert Frost called The Death of the Hired Man. And I'll skip a lot of it. It's a long poem, but this is a poem in which a person comes back to a farm where he used to work because he has no place else to go. He's on the verge of death. And he is described in the poem as a person who has nothing to look backward to with pride and nothing to look forward to with hope. So, what you've described as integrity, or what Erickson means, has to do with being able to look back and having an overall sense of satisfaction with your life. But I think that even for old people like me, there is still a looking forward with hope.
You're right. You're spot on. That is left out of Erickson. You're right. You're
And
100% right.
so I'm working on an essay on that now, which I'm struggling with. But the gist of it is that at the absolute end of life, the hope that you can have is not for yourself, but for those who will follow you.
Mhm, mhm.
Activity, right? But a person like me, I probably have very few years to live because of the nature of my physical condition. Uh, but I should live another 4 or 5 years. Well, I can have a life in that.
Yeah.
I have hopes for that. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I look forward to achievement is the wrong word. That's too Western, but I look forward to being able to play jazz,
Yeah.
photograph jazz, have my friends, have my family, right? And uh, I, as a person who is now widowed, I have some hope that maybe there'll be love in my life again. Maybe.
I hope so.
Uh, so it seems to me that it's very important when we talk about what it means to age well, that it focus not just on looking back on the life that you had, but that it also has to do with retaining hope for a life that you will have. In the piece that I published earlier this week on Substack, where I talked about finding, now that I've become a jazz photographer, 50 years as a social worker, 60 years as a social worker, and now suddenly I'm a jazz photographer and I'm the house photographer for the major jazz club in Baltimore. I have a new life.
Yeah.
I'm not just looking back and saying, oh, that was a good life. I still got a new life, not just built on the past. And I think that it's important for people to understand that they can
100%.
have a new life.
I'm so glad you said that. That's such a great place to end also because that isn't talked about. And I mean, I, I can't, I can't wait to like think more about this. I think that you're really hot onto this. I hope you do write about this. You're
I'm
100%
trying.
right.
It's, it's difficult,
Yeah, it is difficult.
difficult to get it right.
Yeah.
So, but
Well, thank
writing is
you.
not easy, as you know. I don't know how you do what you do, Deborah. You knock out these pieces that are very good day after day.
Thank you.
I struggle.
I think that I'm so glad we're talking. You inspire me to go think about new things, to write about more things that I haven't thought about. So I appreciate you, and I thank you for coming on today.
I appreciate you.
And I look forward to next week.
Very good.
Okay. Well, you have a great day.
Thanks a lot. You too. Take
Okay. Bye.